As your Q&A moderator. My name is Erica Prang, and I'm the Director of Education at the Nature Center for Shaker Lakes. We also have Tori Mills on the call, who would like to introduce the Doan Brook Watershed Partnership. So Tori, I'm going to spotlight you.
Thanks.
There we go.
Hey, I also just wanted to welcome everyone on behalf of the Doan Brook Watershed Partnership. If you're not familiar with our work to restore the Doan Brook Watershed, then we certainly encourage you to jump over to our website. I think you saw the link on the homepage. As well, just wanted to say that we're proud to work with Peggy and John and the Friends of Lower Lake, and you can learn more about them on our website as well. Elizabeth Smith is our new program assistant, and she's also on the line, and I'm excited for you guys to get to know her eventually as well. Thanks so much for the collaboration with the Nature Center, Erica, and we're looking forward to hearing from Peggy.
Yes, us too, and thank you, Tori and Elizabeth, for your work on the series. So just a quick word about the Nature Center. The Nature Center at Shaker Lakes was founded in 1966 to prevent a highway from destroying treasured green space. Since then, we've worked to protect the habitats within our 20 acres, often by removing invasive species and planting native plants. We welcome thousands of visitors each year who enjoy these spaces, including adults, families, school groups, and this evening, we are delighted to be welcoming you. I'd like to extend a special thank you to the Nature Center's Native Plant Sale Committee for their work on organizing this series and our annual plant sale. And for those of you who are curious, that plant sale catalog will be available March 22nd. Bringing Nature Home, the reason everyone is here this evening, is a series of local speakers talking about how each one of us can positively impact the health of the planet by planting native species in our yards and parklands. Just as our teams care for natural spaces, you care for natural spaces in your yards and parklands. To nature, neighborhoods and parklands are connected. Seeds spread. So it is our hope that the Bringing Nature Home series inspires you to think like a naturalist, a designer, a community influencer, or like any one of our presenters for this series, as you plan your own garden and take action to impact the environment around you. It is now my privilege to introduce tonight's speaker, who I'm going to replace in the spotlight here. Our speaker this evening is Peggy Spaeth. Peggy works on improving habitat with the Heights Pollinator Path, Friends of the Bradford Cinder Path, the Nature Center Plant Sale Committee, and as the co-chair of Friends of Lower Lake, a volunteer program of the Doan Brook Watershed Partnership. In the end, she wants everyone to take responsibility to improve and maintain a patch of healthy green space. During Peggy's presentation, we're going to ask you to engage and enjoy and save your questions for the end. And take it away, Peggy.
Thank you. Thank you, Erica. I'm going to share my screen. Or not. Here we go. Excuse me, this is our first talk, and so, you know, there's always a little things going on. I have things on my screen I don't want to see. Play from start. There we go. All right. Well, thank you all for coming. This is quite an occasion. We had a few hundred people sign up for this, and I know it's not about me, it's about nature, and it's about your curiosity. It's so good to see so many people who want to learn about this subject, and welcome to my family and friends and neighbors. And thank you, Erica and the Nature Center and Doan Brook for co-hosting this. This is the third year that we've actually organized a series called Bringing Nature Home, and it's based on the book by Doug Tallamy. And if you haven't read any of Doug Tallamy's books or seen one of his, oh, thank you, Erica. Erica's showing you the book. Then, you know, he can say far better than I can why it's so necessary to plant native, but I'm going to go through that anyways with you. We actually asked, we couldn't think of a better name for this series than Bringing Nature Home. So I actually emailed him and asked his permission to use the name Bringing Nature Home. And he said, of course. So he's a very generous fellow. And I'm just very proud to be part of this movement to go wild. Now, when I say go wild in your own yard, I'm really not talking about going wild as in uncontrolled and 1960s. It's more about indigenous plants and native plants. So I'm going to also, I just want to point out here on the homepage here, a plant list. If you didn't get the link, there's a link here of the plant list of the plants that I'm going to be going through tonight. And the plant list will be in order. And also many of these plants will be available for sale at the Nature Center plant sale. So that you have some time to find that link if you haven't yet done so, because I'm not getting into the plants right away.
I can put that in the chat for everybody, Peggy.
Thank you, Erica.
We're not seeing your slides yet. It's still just the.
You're not. What are you seeing?
It says desktop and it's a list of documents.
Oh dear. Okay, let me search.
Usually if you stop screen sharing and then share again, it'll give you the option to select the.
Oh, got it. Okay.
While you do that, I will put
Is that better?
Yes, beautiful.
Okay. I'm so sorry. I can guarantee you that the next 5 talks will be just, no problems. Okay, so I just want to give you a few disclaimers, please. I'm not a botanist. I'm not a master gardener. I don't have any professional expertise in gardening. So most of what I'm going to talk about has been learning a lot over the last 10 years from other people, as well as being inspired by nature, because ultimately I wanted to bring nature home. I love walking in the metro parks and the wild areas that we have and learning from naturalists rather than from books. There's nothing like going for a walk with a naturalist. And this scene here is Virginia bluebells that bloom in the spring at Jackson Field, one of the metro parks. So just a few disclaimers so that I encourage you to go on your own adventure, and there's no set agenda or one source. There's just so many things to learn about native plants. But I also want to mention that some people call us born again gardeners, because those of us who've gotten involved with native plants, we've all been to the local garden centers and bought the plants that are from Europe and elsewhere and had wonderful daylilies and beautiful plants. But we've kind of opened our eyes to the beauty around us that perhaps we didn't even know, even though we grew up with it. Next slide. Why won't this work? Okay. I'm also having a little trouble. There we go. All right. All right, so why go native? As I said, Doug Tallamy can tell you about this much better than I can. But populations of insects and birds, if you've been aware of the news at all, are in decline globally. But we, even with a small piece of land, we can help increase habitat if we start now and in our own yards and in our own parklands. Doug Tallamy says, garden as if life depends on it, because it truly does. Native plants, insects, and birds co-evolved in any given ecoregion, so they're all dependent upon each other. Studies have shown that native plants are more nutritious for our native insects and birds than the non-natives. And look at this example down below. On the left below, you see wild ginger, and it has little holes in it because some native insects have been munching on it. And they're not gonna kill this plant. They're just going to take a bite or two, and then the plant will come back and will come back year after year. But if on the other hand, you have something like on the right, like English ivy, you'll notice that nothing's eating it. So it doesn't really provide any ecosystem services to our insects or our birds. So this is a very graphic example of the difference between native plants and non-native plants. Oh, I'm going backwards. Okay, so our yards can be bird buffets because 95% of birds feed their nestling caterpillars. I didn't know that before. They've also done studies showing the difference of the number of caterpillars visiting native plant species versus introduced plant species. For example, on the upper left, you have beautiful New York asters, and asters pictured have 108 caterpillar species feeding on them, whereas zinnias on the left, 9. So you can see the huge difference in what we're planting in our yards and how it benefits nature. I'm not telling you not to plant zinnias. Go ahead if you want to have some zinnias, but try to start replacing introduced species in your yards with native species and aim for about 75%. Of course, I say 95% because that's what I do, but aim for about 75% of native species. I'll get the hang of this. So looking at shrubs, caterpillar preferences on shrubs have been studied as well. And now most of us have privet hedges in our yard, and you can see that privets are European, they're from Europe, and they behave very well, nothing eats them. They only have about 24 caterpillar living off of them, but look down below, dogwood, such as this pictured dogwood shrub, 118 caterpillar species. So if you want to know more about shrubs, you should come to our March 18th talk where Robin's going to be talking about native shrubs of Northeast Ohio so that you can start to take out your barberry, your buckthorns, your even forsythia, which only has 1 caterpillar species feeding on it, and learn how to replace it with natives. Oh dear. Okay. So if you plant it, they will come. Pollinators are very essential to our environment. And as you have probably read with the Xerxes Society, they're necessary for the reproduction of over 85% of the world's flowering plants, including more than 2/3 of the world's crop species. The top plant here is a sweet Joe Pye weed that's in our yard. You can see we planted it, and here comes the butterflies, and down below blue lobelia, bumblebee. And if you want to know more about pollinators, because I'm not going to be talking a lot about pollinators, come to the talk on March 30th, where Laura Rokotenitz is going to be talking about pollinators. Okay, somebody's got to call out when I change slides. Forward. So I wanted to show you, so what we're going to do now is I'm going to show you how we, in our yard, my partner and I, in I would say sort of typical residential neighborhood, have started to replace our all of the plants in our yard with native species. So the top map shows you we live on Bradford Road in Cleveland Heights. It's about 100 houses. At the left end on this screen, you can see there's a big church and a big parking lot. And it sort of looks like a jail, but it's not. But it's just how all of these little, these plots are all lined up. But when you look at it from this perspective, you can see that no garden is an island. We're all connected with habitat, and yet we each treat our garden as our own discrete experimental yard. But what we plant in one yard, will go off into the other yard. So I like to start thinking about being part of a larger ecosystem, and looking at this map is a big help. Now, the lower left picture shows our house, and you can see we have, this is a residential development that was built in the 1920s. So you can see our front yard is the traditional little square, and then we have a very deep backyard. And many of the houses in Cleveland Heights are blessed with these deep backyards, but very few people have more in them than perhaps grass and some other areas where, the children do need to play. We don't have any children, so we don't have to worry about having a little plot of grass for soccer. So how do you go wild? So I want you to go for a walk with me in our yard. And our front yard is a very mostly sunny place, and our backyard has a lot of trees that were already in our yard, and it's a shady to part shade woodland. I went forward that time. Who reminded me? Thank you. So this was our front yard when we moved in spring of 2017. It's a food desert. It had 4 introduced species. It had a lawn, a row of hostas along the house. Oh, you can see a couple of tulips there and a blue spruce on the left. And on the tree lawn, there was a maple species that wasn't doing very well. So one of the first things we did was we brought in this tree. It's a tulip tree, and planted it somewhat in the middle to just, you know, stake out a claim. This is 4 years later, and Rome wasn't built in a day, and we're retired. Those are two disclaimers. This has been built little by little, but at this point, you can see how fast tulip trees grow, for one thing. They grow very fast, and they live for hundreds of years, so it's a great tree to plant. We have over 27 native species, including 4 trees, 7 shrubs, and more than 15 flowers and grasses. And we're continually improving this. So I consider our garden to be kind of still a young garden. It's not really a mature garden. And I'm going to take you for a walk through the front yard. I wanted to show you on the left, you can see that row of hostas that was right under the drip line of the house. So one of the first things we did on the upper right here is we laid down some wood chips, because at some point you have to paint your house, you have to wash your windows. And it really, one of my pet peeves is that people do plantings right up against the house, and then, you know, you have to get your house painted and they have to clear that away first. So leaving room, it's also kind of a path there, and it gives a little bit of respite before the garden starts. In the bottom left, it shows you the same scene as on the left where the hostas were, and now there's you know, some really robust shrubs and other plants, which I'll tell you about. A little planning helps. I ended up getting some graph paper and measuring out our front yard, because it really helped me to conceptualize. And we're going to have another talk on garden design on March 22nd. I'm not a garden designer, but Chris Chirasso, who's a landscape architect, is going to walk us through good design and best practices. But I did do a little drawing, and then I, you know, got out my watercolors. But you can see by the third drawing that I was already crossing things out and changing things around, because I really didn't know these native plants. Like many of you might not know these native plants as well as the ones we buy in the garden center. So I've had to make a lot of changes, but it's been really a lot of fun to learn about these plants. And it's a lot of learning about putting the right plant in the right place. And our yards are kind of like very artificial. When you say sun or part sun or everything, you can have all of those in a small front, all of those little kinds of circumstances in your own little front yard. And so finding where a plant will also always tell you when it's happy. So finding where they want to be is always interesting. I wanted to show you this perspective. It's from the window upstairs, because it shows you how we developed the yard little by little, you know, carving out little bits of grass, and then let's dig up some more sod, because then you fall in love with another plant, and where are we going to put it? We really have to take up the sod. And finally, at the bottom right, we ended up asking a landscape company, Clee Landscape, who actually lives around the corner from us, and they came up and just took off our little last piece of turf. But you don't have to take up all your grass. There's always good reasons for having some grass, whether it's for a path or a play area or a place to sit. But we opted out of the lawnmower and ended up giving it to the postman, who was very happy with it. This is the latest view in late summer of what it looks like, and you can see how things have matured. And you can also see that I'm continuing to plant. There's some pots here, and these are prairie drop seed that I was using to line the pathway. I wanted to show you this view of winter, because you can see how contrasted it is with the lawns across the street. We are all used to having green lawns all year round, but our front yard looks more like what you might find in your local park with the leaf litter. But what really excites me is that I know that underneath the leaf litter and in the dead twigs and everything, there's a lot of life going on, and that in the spring, there's insects that will emerge from cocoons, and, you know, all kinds of moths and insects that are overwintering in the leaf litter and in the stems that we've left. Whereas across the street, there's probably not too much biodiversity in those lawns, except for sometimes when you dig up some turf, you might find some grubs. So I don't know how people feel when they see this in the winter, like what's the matter with their yard, but I really love thinking about what's going on. And I also want to mention that the cops are not always at our house, but the people across the street, he's a policeman, so he parks in front of our house. We're not bad people, I assure you. The other thing I want to encourage you to do is, you can see from our yard, oh my goodness, look at everything these people did. But if you just simply start small, you can really get somewhere rather fast. We started a pollinator path on our street where we encouraged our neighbors to just take up a little, like 3 feet by 3 feet. And they planted in the upper left corner, you can see this family just planted these teeny weeny little plugs of plants that they bought at the Nature Center plant sale 2 years ago. And then in the picture next to them, already in the very, very first year, they had blooms of anise hyssop and cardinal flower and rose milkweed. So the following year, I said, well, would you like to make your garden a little bit bigger? So they went out, and you can see Morgan here has grown, and then so has the garden. They enlarged it a little bit, and then the plants that they had originally planted really started to mature. So if you just start, there's 3 species here. If you just start with just maybe 3 species and you start in a little place, then, if you have a job or kids and you're a busy person and you really can't get a lot done, you can work on this little by little. And then when you look back over time, you can say, wow, I've really made a lot of progress. And it's very important to start, and to start now. So first, we're going to go for a little bit of a walk in our sunny front yard. And this is the tree lawn, which now doesn't have any grass left. I'm going to talk about some of the plants that we planted in our sunny front yard. Echinacea pallida, pale coneflower. Everybody that I know seems to have coneflowers in their yard. This one's a little bit different, and I just love it because it has this kind of wilted look, and yet a very alert look. It reminds me of a ballerina after a dance, and the tutu's kind of limp and very graceful. It's a beautiful plant. Both of the pictures on the right have pollinators on them. It reseeds readily. I've dug up some new plants from they just came up underneath it. It's also, if you leave up the seed heads, you'll find a lot of goldfinches and other birds are feeding on it all winter long. And I just think it's a beautiful, look at it in the sunshine. It's just a beautiful plant. I'm going to talk a little bit about milkweeds, although I'm sure you're going to hear a lot more about them, or you've already heard about milkweeds from Laura later on when she talks about pollinators. But there's 13 species of milkweeds native to Ohio. We have 3 of them in our yard. This one's called rose milkweed. And I just want to make just a comment about Latin names and common names. In common names, there's common names that are common to many plants that are different. And so, but each plant has its unique Latin name. One example I'll use is false indigo. If you Google false indigo, you'll come up with about 3 or 4 different species. But if you Google the Latin name, you'll come up with exactly 1. And I had 5 years of Latin, and I don't remember any of it. But if you just think of it as like, your friend Sue, that's her nickname, right? But her real name is Suzanne. So you can think of rose milkweed as the nickname and Asclepias incarnata as her real name. And it's just a note. It's kind of fun to learn these new names. And so I'm freeing up space in my hard drive of my brain for getting people's names and trying to learn plant names, which doesn't work very well socially, but it works for plants. One of the things I really like about this milkweed, other than the fact that pollinators just love it as well, is that it grows in a clump. So it doesn't spread very rapidly, and it's a nice tall plant. On the lower left, you can see I also had some extra, they were in pots. I just put the pots in a planter. They came up in the planter. So, you can also think if you don't have a yard, but you have a balcony, or you want to just put plants in pots, you can of course try these plants in pots. Just see what's going to happen. The other milkweed that seems to be very popular is the common milkweed, which is very common. Now, so many people ask me, should I amend my soil? And well, the answer to that is, why bother when your milkweed is going to come up by itself between a patio, a fence, and a concrete driveway? It will grow anywhere. And this is just a very good reminder to you, like, why would you amend your soil if it doesn't need it? So if you just dig up a piece of, a little patch of grass, you can plant your common milkweed there without doing anything to the soil. It's a beautiful pink, very fragrant flower. And this one we didn't plant, it came up when we moved in and got 6 feet tall. And on the lower left, you can see this is the egg of the monarch butterfly, which it's the host, the monarch. All of the milkweeds are host to monarch butterflies, so we want to grow lots of them to keep the monarchs healthy. And then here in the middle, you see the caterpillar. This is on the right. There's a beautiful patch down the street from me at a church of common milkweed against a fence that has 5-leafed ivy. But I do have to tell you, common milkweed is very aggressive, okay? So you could have a common milkweed hedge if you wanted. It grows by underground rhizomes. So if you plant it here, where it is, it can send out an underground runner and come up like 6 feet away. So if you want, you just have to be aware of that, because in gardening, we're curators. We are gardeners. Gardeners by definition are people who tend things. So you can tend your common milk, you can cut it back when it's coming up in an unwanted place. Or if you really want a nice big thick stand of milkweed, go for it. It's a beautiful plant. The third milkweed I wanted to talk about is butterfly milkweed. It's called Asclepias tuberosa because the root is kind of tuberous. I found that it really likes to be dry, so that's a blessing. You don't have to water it. In the upper right-hand corner, you can see there's this tiny little seedling that popped up in front of the clump. And on that tiny little seedling, there were 3 caterpillars, which just blew me away. So again, back to plant it and they will come. I guarantee you will have all of this wildlife in your yard if you simply put these plants in. I happen to love purples and oranges together, or yellows and pinks, and this is the blue lobelia, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, growing and blooming with the butterfly milkweed. So yes, here is the blue lobelia growing up. It's a beautiful plant, and you can see the bee is immediately on it. So if somebody has something going on, if you all mute yourselves so we don't hear whatever it is going on, mute your. I think somebody's eating dinner while I'm talking. That's what it sounds like. But blue lobelia is a very prolific plant. It'll reseed. It'll come up year after year. And it's just beautiful. Here it's growing in the same garden as the butterfly milkweed with obedient plant, which is a very tall, spiky plant where the blooms kind of progress up and down the stem. And you can see from this picture here with these wonderful openings how attractive it is to pollinators. Then the other lobelia that will guarantee you hummingbirds, if they're anywhere in the neighborhood, which they probably are because they're native to Northeast Ohio, is the cardinal flower. And it also makes a good container plant. Down below, you can see again, I had some extra, it was in a pot, it bloomed. We had hummingbirds right here by the driveway. And it's very easy to propagate from seeds if you want to. Collect the dry pods in the fall and sprinkle the seeds into a pot or into the soil, leave them outside, they'll come up. And the lower right shows some seeds that germinated in the spring, and these are how big they were in the fall. I would plant them in the fall and then they'll bloom the next year. In this picture, please note in the upper right-hand picture, this is Liatris spicata, and just keep a note in your head about how high it is, because I want to show you what's going on. This is in a neighbor's yard, and I want to show you what happened in my yard with that plant. Another hummingbird magnet is the native honeysuckle, trumpet honeysuckle. It's a climbing, twining vine. It's very easy to grow. I have it in both shade and sun. The hummingbirds love it. And it's also easy to propagate from cuttings. I've cut them off, stuck them in pots and grown them up and given them to many friends. So it's a beautiful vine. And I love how the flower comes out of this circle of leaf at the very end. It's just very cool. Oops. Here's another example of, do I need to amend my soil? This Ohio spiderwort came up between a brick wall and an asphalt driveway. So no, don't bother. This will grow anywhere. It's a wonderful plant that each day a flower only blooms for one day. It's a spectacularly glowing blue purple in the yard, and it'll spread very nicely for you if that's what you want it to do. This is sort of a new clump of it that hasn't really gotten very big yet because it was new. Culver's root on the left blooms very lovely at the same time as many of these other plants that I've shown you. It's a white spiky plant. And on the right is one of the grasses that I love. It's little blue stem. You can see one of my neighbors and friends has grown it along her neighbor's driveway. It sort of makes a hedge without being a hedge, which is lovely. And in the fall, it turns this gorgeous rusty color. There's no sun on that day, and yet it still looked like it had a kind of a glow, that it was just turned on inside. This particular grass sends out it just gets bigger and bigger. It's not clumping per se. It'll grow in this, just as you see it, and create a mass that you can either let get bigger and bigger, or control as you garden. Gray-headed coneflower, you can see there's a bumblebee on it. Is a beautiful yellow flower with very attractive seed heads that you can leave up all year round. And I wanted to make a comment about how tall this is. In nature, like when these plants are in meadows or fields, they all grow with companion plants that are also tall and strong. And so they hold each other up nicely. But in our garden, sometimes we need to stake them, which I hate, having to fuss with stakes and stuff like that. So I'm trying to arrange other plants so they'll start to hold each other up. But this is one that definitely needs some staking if you don't have anything that's going to be holding it up. Monardas are very fragrant bee magnets. They have a wonderful aroma. They grow tall, and if you would like to, you can cut them back before they bloom and get a shorter plant. The wild bergamot on the left, the lovely glowing lavender color, it tends to get powdery mildew after it blooms, which I just sort of cut them back and say goodbye to the plant, and it comes back year after year. The monarda on the right, the bee balm, is red, and again, hummingbirds like red. So you could just have a big red garden and just have nothing but hummingbirds if you like. Verbena hustata, I just love saying verbena hustata. I'm not sure that's how you should pronounce it, but blue vervain. When I first saw this plant, I thought, what an insignificant little purple flower. But it's not insignificant at all. Now that my sort of sensibility of plants has changed from the kind of like obviously spectacular to the really spectacular. And it grows very tall, and I've seen hummingbirds on this one and a variety of pollinators, but even more interesting is the seed heads. They just get really massive and curly, and they will reseed. So what I've been doing is cutting them and putting them in vases in the house where they can't get into any mischief unless you want them to. And you can see how tall it is. John here, my partner, is 6'1", and it's towering over his head. So it's a tall plant. I'm trying to put tall plants at the back of the yard. Doesn't always work. This is for a New York ironweed, which is a big clumping ironweed that I definitely had to stake. You can see here, there's a metal pole right over here. And I just lassoed it around so that it would stay up, but it's got a very robust stem. And I was down sitting on the ground, kind of weeding and picking up unwanted things one day, and hummingbirds were at this New York ironweed above my head. And you can see that the monarchs love it as well. Are you all still awake? Okay, so remember when I pointed out the liatris, I think it's pronounced, in that other yard that was just about the same height as, 18 inches tall? For some reason, in my yard, it grew 7 feet tall, which kind of shows you that when we take plants out of their companion planting settings, like, oh, here's a meadow full in a natural meadow, not a man-made meadow, then sometimes they behave differently than they do in nature because they don't have a lot of competition. And this just found a really happy spot, but it was kind of like right in front of everything else. And even though I just thoroughly enjoyed the plant, I did dig it up, and you can see I'm trucking it away. My partner, John, says that when we bring a new plant into the house, he tells it, don't unpack, don't make any friends, because you might be moving. So we do move a lot of plants around, and it doesn't hurt them. You have to be bold. Because remember, you're doing, we're all learning these plants together, and you're doing a lot of experimenting. When I first heard about mountain mint, I was a little afraid because I've been battling other varieties of mint in various yards my whole life. So I carefully planted this mountain mint with buffers all around it, a wall and stones, and you're not going anywhere. And it's just a beautiful plant with a silvery gray foliage and a very unusual flower that the bees are there just covering it all the time. But I also found that it can be aggressive if you let it. But on the upper left picture here, you can see it sends out these bright red runners. So, I mean, if you're just watching your plant, you go like, no, I don't want you over there. And you can cut off the runner, or you can root them somewhere and start another plant. This is a plant I dug up, and you can see the runners are coming out everywhere. So it's really up to you how you want to deal with it. It makes a beautiful mass. We've been planting it in some public spaces just because it's such a gorgeous plant. It almost looks like a hedge sometimes. So I heartily recommend this mountain mint. I've also made tea from it, and it's a very nice tea. Getting into fall, you can buy Chinese mums. You can see they're very inexpensive. And then, in their plastic pots after they're done blooming, with no pollinators visiting them, they end up on the trash heap on our tree lawns waiting for the city to take them away. Or you could plant native asters, which are simply spectacular. And there's hundreds of varieties. I'm only talking about 2 of them. On the lower left are both of them. The light purple one on the right of this picture is the New York aster, and it's very prolific, and it makes a lovely mass. I've seen it at Holden Arboretum. They just have it lining a sidewalk. So in the fall, it just is like this big purple mass of asters. It reseeds readily. I just took some seeds off of one of the plants a few weeks ago in the snow, dried them out, put them in pots, and they actually germinated in my house in a sunny window in 7 days. So I was kind of, ooh. The other aster here is the New England aster, which comes in a variety of colors. You never know, is it pink, purple, and it's a much taller plant. I've seen it in fields, and it grows very tall. So I've been kind of cutting it back before it blooms, so it's not quite so tall and that I don't have to stake it. Well, there's lots more sunny plants we can talk about, but we don't have that much time. So we're going to go for a walk in the shady backyard now. And it's a woodland inspired by nature. It's inspired by my years and years and years of walking through the Metroparks and other natural places all around the place, and looking at what is growing there under the trees on the forest floor. and really wanting to live in that forest. So it occurred to me, well, let's just do it in our own yard. So on the picture on the left is what the backyard looked like when we first moved in. It was just grass and euonymus and English ivy and English ivy and English ivy. So we kind of started tackling it a little bit at a time. We have a dog, so the dogs like to run around the perimeter of the yard, generally speaking. And so we laid down a wood chip buffer around the edge, the fences. And also because if you have a buffer, you can see what's coming in from your neighbor's yard that you don't want. If you have a lot of plants growing there, they might get past you. But, you know, like our neighbor on the left side here, this fence here, it's lots and lots of English ivy and bishop's weed and other plants that we really don't want in our yard. So we can, you know, we can kind of go along the fence and deal with that as things go on. And we started to carve out some beds and planted one of my favorite trees so that I could see it from the backyard, which is the redbud, which has all seasons interest, big heart-shaped leaves that turn yellow in the fall. We also had a lot of stones on site, so we just used them to edge our gardens, because one of the things about gardening with, you know, going wild is that if you live in a residential neighborhood, people really want to see that your gardens are intentional and that you are, you know, being a bit conventional maybe, and your edges are nice so that you're not freaking everybody out by letting them think that your garden is weedy. So edges and neat edges and some organization, I feel, are very important. So in a woodland, I've noticed that you could either have a matrix of different species or you could have a monoculture, and it's really your choice. Like if you have a lot of pachysandra and you really like that kind of like look, or you even like the look of English ivy or whatever it is, there are plants that I'm going to show you that you can plant and that will fill in very nicely and somewhat aggressively as just a monoculture, or you can take a page from what nature is doing and create kind of a matrix of plants on a woodland floor. So this is kind of my dream come true, because I had seen a scene like this at Jackson Field in the woodlands, where in the spring, all of these different species were simultaneously blooming. And these are mostly spring ephemerals, and ephemeral is a word that means transitory, brief, and they come up before the tree canopy has leafed out, and they bloom, and then many of these plants in this picture then create a beautiful ground cover layer that's green throughout the summer. And then there's other plants that bloom at different times in a woodland forest. And I would say that, you know, I've been telling you, don't improve your soil for the plants in the sunny front yard. But if you've just taken up English ivy or lawn or whatever, you might want to add some compost, because think about it this way: in the woods, those leaves and other enriching things have been enriching that soil for hundreds of years. In your backyard, if you've had lawn or English ivy or something like that and been raking your leaves away, you know, the soil probably isn't really rich enough to really get some of these plants started. So I did add some and till in some compost to make this habitat more hospitable to these plants. And then over the years, we're allowing all the leaves to stay there, and they'll just poke up through the leaves and it'll continue to improve. So one of the first things that blooms in the woods in the spring, and this is something we are all looking forward to in a few weeks, is ramp, wild leek. And it just, on the left, you can see here at North Chagrin Reservation, and there's nothing else blooming. There's no leaves on the trees, and this spectacular leafy green onion comes up. And what I think is so special about this plant is then it blooms in the fall when the leaves are completely gone. And this picture shows you what the flowers of the wild leek look like. And then the flowers, once they're pollinated, because there are different pollinators that are following the sequence of flowers through the whole season. And I don't know who in particular pollinates the wild ramp, but it produces these black shiny seeds, which are really pretty. And if you just maybe take one little bunch of them and put them in your yard, you might have your own lakes. And then, okay, so in the spring, do you want to have crocuses that are coming from the Alps blooming in your yard? Or would you like to have a native plant called bloodroot? It has a fleshy red root that when you cut it, it has red liquid coming out of it. And when it comes up in the early spring, what I love is these white flowers kind of hugged and wrapped in their individual leaves. You can see there's a pollinator ready, just waiting for this plant to pollinate. So, you know, there's different pollinators that come along at different parts of the season. This picture is so amazing to me because there's just pollen everywhere. It's all over the petals and it's all over the bee. The other thing, so the lower left one is one actually coming up in the woods. And the lower right, I just wanted to show you what these leaves look like after the flowers are gone. They're just these deeply scalloped, very, very green leaves that are so decorative in the garden. The other thing I want to tell you about going wild is be curious. I mean, it's so much fun and you're not going to hurt anything. If you want to occasionally dig up a plant, look at the roots. How is this growing? And in the bloodroot, what I had a lot of fun finding out was on the lower left here is it developed a seed head after it was pollinated. The seed head split open, and these are these shiny seeds with a fleshy appendage. And I read that ants like to eat that, so they carry these seeds off to the ant nests. And the ant nests are very fertile places for the seeds that germinate. If you do collect these seeds, just plant them right away at spring. You don't want them to dry out. You want to, you know, put them in the ground and they'll just come up the next year and start growing new little bloodroot plants. It's just a spectacular spring. I just so looking forward to seeing it this spring. The mayapple, you probably are familiar with. This is a scene from, I don't know, maybe it's actually at Lower Lake Park. They're such a welcome sight too. And in this picture, they're blooming with trillium, which I'm going to tell you about in a minute. Mayapples have a little white flower underneath the leaves. The leaves are like an umbrella, and the flower then turns into a kind of a little green apple looking thing, but don't eat it. Apparently they're poisonous. I haven't tried it on myself or anyone else, but I believe it. Beautiful color, beautiful texture. We're just going to stay here the rest of the night. Okay, now trillium, this beautiful white flower, is the Ohio State white wildflower, and I've never seen a scene like this in northeastern Ohio. This is down at Arc of Appalachia in southern Ohio, which if you really want to treat yourself to something, you should go down there in the spring and see the wildflowers. They're just so abundant in this beautiful place. But there's a whole hillside here of white trillium, which you can grow in our own yards. White trillium is so interesting because after it's pollinated, it turns this pink color here. And it blooms at the same time as wild geranium. And in this picture here, you can see there's, let's see, wild ginger, trillium, wild geranium. I don't even know what all, but it's a wonderful matrix, like I was talking about before, of all these different spring ephemerals. You've probably seen trout lily. It's a very common flower. We also, I think there's a pollinator on it that comes up in early spring, and it has this kind of mottled leaf, and you'll see it just kind of carpeting places, but it actually takes like 8 years for this bulb to send up a flower. So, you know, this is the kind of thing you just don't take for granted in nature, is like how hard it and how long it is for some things to survive and reproduce. This is just to show you, you know, a lot of people want to rake their leaves because they're afraid that plants aren't going to come up. But these trout lilies, just like the mayapples and the trillium and jack-in-the-pulpit and all those other spring ephemerals, they must have a little pointy thing on the end of their leaves because they just poke up through even these really thick oak leaves, which, as you know, are really tough. Jack in the Pulpit. Look at this beautiful plant. These are at Lower Lake Park. And after they bloom with this rather improbable looking flower, they form red clusters of berries. And again, be curious and take a look at what happens. First, they have the berries are all green. Where the flower was, they turn into the red. This is corn, looks like corn on the cob. Something was feeding it. You can take those berries and separate them. Apparently, you shouldn't touch the red fleshy part because it can irritate your skin. I haven't tried it. I listen to what people tell me. I planted these in a pot that I cut the bottom off just so that I could remember where I planted them and put them in the ground in this right here. And then covered it with a piece of screen so the chipmunks wouldn't dig them up in the other little bowls in our yard. And then in the spring, I dug them up, and sure enough, they'd form these little bulblets, and then put them back in the pot, and they started growing little Jack in the Pulpit. So it's such fun to be curious about these plants that I didn't grow up with, and yet they were all around me. I found so many interesting things about them. So as you can see, this is a matrix of woodland plants, and the spiky white plant is called foam flower. And there's two varieties that I know about. The one that I'm growing is the Tiarella cordifolia. Isn't that a pretty name? You almost want to name a child Tiarella cordifolia. And it spreads by runners or stolons. And you can see here, there's little ones, and I've just kind of pulled those up and given them away, but I'm trying to also let them fill in the garden. And then in the upper right, there's the other Tiarella that's more clump forming. You can see in the bottom right that they are very colorful in a subtle way, purples and mauves in the fall, which is another great feature of all these plants, is they have all season interest. So as far as hyacinths go, do you want to, go and buy bulbs that are from the Mediterranean? Or would you like to think about the wild hyacinth? There's this marvelous field of wild hyacinths at Jackson Field in the spring. And again, somebody said to me, well, wild hyacinths always flop over in my garden. And you can see why. They're tall. But in this picture, they are growing with young ferns. And so, their companion plants are holding each other up. And again, on the lower left, you can see a pollinator already that's just emerged and is finding a plant. There it is. It's been waiting for it. They've been waiting for each other. So wild hyacinth is a really beautiful plant. Bottle brush grass is a shade-loving grass, and it grows in the woods. You can see it kind of like, to me, it looks like just like kind of candles lit up in the woods. And we have some in our yard that's doing really well, and it's very spectacular. It doesn't spread a lot either. It's not like, we often think of grasses as being very aggressive, and it's just the kind of grass that, throws up a clump here and there. But if you do want to go for a monoculture, and I understand that, sometimes I wish I had one myself, and these are some native replacements for your Pachysandra or your English ivy. Virginia waterleaf, this is a big patch of Virginia waterleaf that may have been planted intentionally at Lower Lake in the wildflower garden, and it's spread and just filled out. And the plants, the flowers are both lavender and white, and it's an early bloomer, and after it blooms it has a lot of foliage. So if this is the kind of look you want, this is a good solution. Along the edge of it, and again, I think this might have been planted intentionally because people used to work in this woodland garden at Lower Lake, is path rush, which likes to be dry and is a nice alternative for a grass in a dry, shady place. Juncus tenuis. It also seeds very easily. If you just get a bunch of seeds off of it and put them somewhere, it'll pop up anywhere you want it to. Another plant that I didn't know made a good ground cover is the dwarf crested iris, which is native here. It's just an adorable little iris. These pictures are from Holden's wildflower garden, which is a must go-to place if you want to go to a beautiful wildflower garden that actually has labels of what the plants are. So it's very educational. And Iris cristata blooms in May. And in the lower left picture, it's under a pine tree. So, you know, often we go like, oh, what's going to grow under pines and amidst the pine needles? Well, dwarf-crested iris, apparently. And then after it bloomed, on the right, it's just the foliage just filled in, and you have this really lovely texture. It's planted with a Christmas fern, which in the left picture you can see is just coming up in the spring, and then the right's getting that deep green that Christmas fern has. So this is, again, a nice ground cover. This is a picture of Solomon seal, which is growing again at the Wildflower Garden at Lower Lake. And it's just filled in over decades beautifully. It's so graceful. And it sends out these dangling flowers. Again, another ground cover that's very, spreads well and provides a lot of ecosystem services to native insects and other wildlife. I can imagine lots of little things hiding under there, birds pecking away, and this golden ragwort. On the left is a picture of a clump that I just put in our yard that hasn't spread yet, but golden ragwort will spread. And I love this picture. I took it from the internet, from Larry Wiener's website. He's written some really great landscaping books with native plants. I'm blanking on the name of his book. Maybe somebody else can remember it and put it in chat. But in this picture, you have a huge massive golden ragwort in bloom at the same time as a redbud and flowering dogwood. And who wouldn't want to just walk down that path? We're trying to, in one of my other projects at Lower Lake, and again on the Bradford Cinder Path, we're trying to plant some of these plants to replicate these beautiful spring vistas. And a lot of these plants have year-round interest, like golden ragwort, for example. Once it blooms and the pollinators are, you know, all over it, it has this lovely green leaf that will spread and create a monoculture, which we've just been talking about. Some people hate wild strawberry. I happen to love it, not just because it tastes good, but it's just such a fresh spring green, and it will spread and spread and spread. But I use it kind of as a living mulch underneath shrubs and places where other things won't grow, so that we don't have to weed. And like the mountain mint that I showed you, it sends out these red runners. I'm very partial to red runners, because then I go like, oh, okay, you're not going there. But it sends out these shoots. You can give them away, you can just cut them, whatever you want to do. But I do like the idea of a living mulch in the garden, so you don't have to go and buy mulch. I mentioned Christmas fern earlier. It's a beautiful native fern that's very leathery looking, very clumping. This is on the left is 3 of them. And in the fall, it's still green. It's called Christmas fern because it's still green around Christmas. And it eventually does, you know, go brown and then sends up new growth in the spring. Growing with the Christmas fern in this picture on the upper left is Zizia aurea. I like saying that almost as much as Rattabita pinnata, or golden Alexander, which is a larval host to the black swallowtail, even though I haven't yet had one show up and knock on my back door. It's just a wonderful, easy growing plant, welcome color in the early spring. It grows in sun and shade. It reseeds easily. And in the bottom picture is a picture from Jackson Field with it growing with sensitive fern in a sunny meadow. So, and it's early, it's an early bloomer. So by midsummer, it's not looking yellow. So it's very versatile, very big benefit to a beautiful butterfly. I would heartily recommend it for a woodland or a sunny garden. I'm going to talk just a little bit about a couple of sedges, and sedges are like grasses, but their stems are triangular. So people say sedges have edges. And this one is such fun because look at the seed heads. They look like little maces. And you can take those seeds and you can start them in pots. This is just a small bunch of it that will spread eventually. As I told you, our garden is still relatively new, not a big mature garden. So eventually some of these clumps that we've planted will spread. It likes moist shade. It spreads kind of slowly, but it's easy to propagate from seed. If you can just take a pot and put the seeds in and then overwinter it. The Carex plantaginea seersucker sedge is a great erosion control if you have a hillside. This picture here on the upper right is from behind Squires Castle at one of our Metroparks, and it was just growing all the way down the hill. This is obviously not summer because everything looks a little chilly with no leaves, but I kind of we have a hill, a moist hill in our yard. So I mimicked nature and replicated it. And I think this is a really nice substitute for hostas, for a shady place, because these tufts really spread. And then you can take a group and you can tear it apart and expand it or give it away. And it has this incredibly improbable flower, these, fuzzy yellow flowers just filled with pollen. It's actually still green in our yard right now, and some bunnies have found their way to it and are starting to nibble on it. I'm only talking about one goldenrod. I love so many goldenrods, but we're getting short of time. This is the blue-stemmed goldenrod, called because actually its arching stem has a very blue cast. And these pictures on top are from Lower Lake. And what I love about the picture on the upper left is it's kind of in the shade, but that yellow kind of glows like somebody lit it with a match. So we are planted in our yard, and you can see it's just arching over the path in the fall. And it's so important to be planting asters and goldenrods so that you have a buffet for insects and birds all year round as they emerge and look for a plant. But there's many, many more. There's kind of a goldenrod for every place. There's goldenrods for shade. There's goldenrods for sun. There's those gargantuan ones if you want to go crazy. And then there's these little teeny weeny ones. So I would explore goldenrods if I were you. This is just one climber that is so ignored in the horticultural trade. And it's instead of English ivy, you can plant Virginia creeper. And we actually, when we pulled up our English ivy, Virginia creeper was under it. I mean, it just started coming up because it's native to the region. It probably had been outcompeted by the aggressiveness of English ivy. So it's a very easy to grow plant. In the woods, sometimes you'll see it as a ground cover, but when it grows up something like a fence or a tree, it will bury, like many other vines do the same thing. Poison ivy does that. English ivy does that. They bury when they go vertical. And look at these attractive blue berries on red stems. What robin would not be attracted to that in the fall? And the fall color, this red fall color is pretty spectacular. So I encourage people to take a look at Virginia creeper. And then when you run out of space in your own yard, you can start using other people's spaces or encouraging your neighbors to start planting on their tree lawns or on their front lawns. So we started a pollinator pathway in the Heights. We have over 80 people, not just in Cleveland Heights, but in Shaker Heights and South Euclid and Beechwood and Minnesota. Relatives in Rhode Island, our friends in Rhode Island are starting this, where you can plant habitat and try to start connecting habitat. And I mean, I like to walk down my street with the dog and just, be following these beautiful gardens instead of just looking at grass. The church on the corner, we asked them, could we have a pollinator patch on their property? And they said, sure. So one of the neighbors dug up a path and we planted plants. And this is the first year garden. I think that's a pretty good showing for the first year. And this summer, they'll probably be even bigger. So we have a Heights Pollinator Pathway Facebook group. If you'd like to join in, where we're all teaching each other and sharing information and trading seeds and plants and spreading the word about other webinars to go to. and also that we have more information on a website that's ecologicalheights.com. So the basic question is, we have this huge invasion of introduced plants that are coming out of our yard, like privet and English ivy, and it's going into our parklands. And then we're spending a lot of time and money removing them. So this is a picture on the left of English ivy growing up a tree. It's not good to let English ivy grow up trees, it'll kill them, and just flooding this parkland. So what if instead of, our introduced species invading the parklands, that we had native species that were, spreading into the parklands? So if you want to find out more about identifying and removing harmful invasive plants from your yard, what is harmful and what is not harmful, and also from our parklands, then come to next week's talk when my partner John Barber is giving his talk on invasive plants. He gives a very good talk, much more organized than I am. And just look at this native Virginia creeper on the lower left, and you can see the insects have been nibbling on this, and it's turning red in the fall. So this is a parkland photo. I guess I'm at the end of my rope, but I'd encourage you to visit the website Ecological Heights, because we have a list of Northeast Ohio native plant sources, and also come to Nick Mycash's talk. His talk's called Nick's Picks, where he's going to talk about even more native species. This isn't everything we have in our yard, obviously, that I've talked about, but Nick's going to highlight some of his favorites so that you can be more familiar with them. And I just really encourage you to follow through on these talks and learn about all of the different aspects of going native. I was just thinking today that you could take one yard or one piece of woodland, and you could probably generate, 300 talks about this one place. You could talk about the insects and the fungi and, all the different ecosystems that go on. So, just dig into it and learn as much as you can about our natural world, because humans we don't have a light footprint on this earth, and we really need to learn to take better care of our own yards and our parklands, and spread the word and be a born-again gardener like we are. So I'm happy to take questions if you have any.
All right, a lot of people are typing in their thank yous into the chat. Peggy, it seems like you inspired a lot of gardeners today.
Thank you.
We did have a few questions throughout the presentation, and John Barber and Nick Mycash were very quick to answer those. So thank you, John and Nick, for keeping up with the questions as they were coming through. But some of the common topics that were coming up were what tips you have for keeping the cost low for a new gardener who's looking for some of these native plants or seeds.
That's a really good question. If you want seeds, there's OPN seeds. It's an Ohio seed source, and their seeds are not expensive, so I would encourage that. I know the Nature Center is offering plug packs again, the third year, where $20, which I think is a pretty decent price. You can get a good pollinator. The garden that I showed you from the family on our street, they bought one little plug, say that 3 times fast, plug pack for $20, which I think is a good price. So you can shop at the Nature Center plant sale. You can ask people who might be gardening with native plants like me to share some extra plants. A lot of us who are in this are starting our own plants from seeds, and we love to share and spread and do some back over the fence gardening, as it used to be called. And also there is there's a wonderful woman, Gail Martin, Natives in Harmony, which is a drive. It's a couple of hours, so you're gonna pay for gas, but she has pretty inexpensive small plants, young plants. So just shop around. You don't have to spend a fortune. It's much less expensive than going to some of our garden centers, I assure you.
And then we have a question from Erin looking for advice for inspiring a community to get started, to start something like a pollinator pathway, and how my elementary schools get involved. John's recommended ecologicalheights.com to see the section on Bradford Pollinator Path, but do you have anything else to add to that notion? How can people inspire others beyond themselves?
Well, I think the first thing is to do it yourself, because there's nothing more compelling than seeing success with something. That's kind of what happened with us when we started our Bradford Pollinator Path. Our street, fortunately, has a history of having like a lot of communication. So there's an email group. And I just, in the middle of February, when I was bored, I emailed everybody and said, would you like to, plant some gardens this spring? And after we had about, a dozen people said, hey, that's a great idea. And they were able to buy the plug packs for $20 from the plant sale. And I actually collected all the orders and delivered them to them. It just was easier than having a lot of orders going to the plant sale, and also saved on delivery charges for you. So you have to take a little initiative and be willing to put some work into things. And then other people from the two adjacent streets contacted us and said, I live on East Fairfax. What are you guys doing over on Bradford? And then somebody on East Monmouth said, I've been walking down your street and I've noticed these signs, because we put signs up, which mean, and they're very attractive signs. They're really well designed and they're colorful and they have flowers on them. And they said Bradford Pollinator Path. So, it kind of got contagious. And then we broadened it and said, well, now we need a sign for Heights Pollinator Path. So, just start something and people will come along. And now my good friend in Rhode Island is doing it in her neighborhood, and other people see what you're doing and they want to do it. And so it's kind of infectious, I think, kind of like a disease, but in a good way.
Ooh, we've got some exciting comments in. Beth is the Cub Master for their Cub Scout group, and they are going to be putting in a native pollinator garden that will become an outdoor classroom for the entire school with 100 square feet.
Great.
At that location. That's awesome.
That's great. I wanted to go, I forgot to talk about starting a school garden. My experience with schools, I had two children, Canterbury Elementary, is that, teachers are very busy people and they have their curriculum and everything else. So if you wanted to start something, it's really hard to ask teachers to take on an additional burden. And then there's the problem of sustainability, because we parents move on as our children grow. So I don't know quite what the answer is to starting a school garden and having sustainability and responsibility. But I do know that there is one very special teacher in Shaker Heights, Tim Kalin, who is an art teacher, but he's a born-again gardener. He started 2 school gardens as an after-school program at Onaway School and Lomond that are simply fabulous and gorgeous and very educational. He has a whole curriculum built up for it, and he does it pretty much as a volunteer. So I don't know what the answer is to school gardens, other than it takes a lot of work and commitment, and being able to have it be sustainable and hand it on to somebody else, I think, is a real big issue, because, we flow through these institutions and we're gone. Hi, Sue.
I'm scrolling through. Do you have any tips for keeping deer from eating your native plants? Trillium came up in the chat quite a bit earlier.
Yeah, well, we have too many deer. This might be, this is controversial, but I would say that we need to ask our communities, our elected officials, to cull deer, because it's not healthy for our parklands, for one thing. I mean, the deer eat all of the understory in the woods, and then there's nothing to regenerate a forest. So they're out of control. They're almost, I think I've read in some places that they're the #1 threat to our woodlands. So first of all, we need to somehow control the deer population, but we do have deer on our street. And I've noticed that deer have deer paths. We've discouraged deer, and I have to thank my partner, John, for this. He has a magic spray that he sprays in the spring. We also have these little bags of some kind of salt that we hang on trees, and some of the we cage things. I hate caging things, but I always cage new tender things so that they can't get in. Or if we're working in the parklands, we always cage things, because why would you want to go to all this work to plant things and not protect them from the deer? So there's kind of a multi-pronged approach. And so now at this point, the deer on our street, they kind of ignore our yard because they have their own path where they go to the neighbors across the street and eat the bird seed, and then they go to the other neighbors and they eat the hostas. So you can maybe do some avoidance, and they might decide to go somewhere else. I don't have an answer, another answer to that. Fence in your yard. It's terrible. Keeps the riffraff out too,
John says wolves.
Wolf, yeah, wolves are the ultimate. Yeah, they don't have their natural predator is missing. Reintroduce wolves to our neighborhoods. How'd you like to stand up at a city council meeting and say, we want to reintroduce wolves to our neighborhood?
We've got another idea for a school garden to make it a project for a master gardener or another volunteer who is year-round.
Yep, that's a good idea.
For maintaining it over the summer when the students are gone. I'm very impressed by our audience tonight and all of the great ideas that have been flowing back and forth. Many of you have jumped in to answer each other's questions, which is wonderful. We've got quite the community of gardeners on the call today, new and experienced alike. And so I think we are caught up with the questions. Peggy, I'd like to thank you again for taking the time to put together this presentation and share with everyone and organize the series for us. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. It was so nice having you, seeing all your pictures, and hopefully we'll all get together sometime and garden together. Thank you all for coming.
Yes, thanks everyone. Enjoy the rest of your evenings, and hopefully we'll see you next week for the next talk.
March 10th, I think it is. John. Okay.
Thank you, everyone.